this summit and to have a very good exchange with them. South Africa, as I said, we are truly honored to have this moment and opportunity to head the G20. And we are also very pleased to be in a troika with Brazil and the United States, as we have taken over from Brazil and will execute our responsibilities during the course of the year. As you know, there will be more than 100 meetings that will be taking place through the length and the breadth of South Africa, and culminating with the Leaders' Summit, which will be held here in Johannesburg. And thereafter, we will have the pleasure of handing over to the United States of America, who will then take over the presidency of the G20, and we will continue working with them as part of the Troika, as the previous presidency of the G20 also becomes part of the Troika, and the incoming one, the following year, also becomes part of the Troika. So we look forward to good cooperation and good interchange amongst all of us, and I do believe that the priorities and the themes that we have set out are clearly achievable, and already we're getting a good sense that there will be thoroughgoing discussions through a number of, if you like, sub-themes and various forums that will touch on various aspects of the priorities that we have set out through our various government ministries, as well as private sector, as well as social communities organizations. So we gung-ho as South Africa, we're raring to go, and this has been a really good start. There have been other meetings in other parts of the country touching on labor and a whole number of other issues. The next week it will be Treasury or Finance in Cape Town, and I will also have the honor to be present as they meet. So the ball is rolling. The G20 machinery is now underway, and as South Africa, we've been participating in all of them throughout the various years that we've been part of the G20, and this year we are president of the G20 process, and we are rather pleased with that. Yesterday, we were meant to present the budget of our own country to our parliament, and discussions that ensued prior to that presentation in both the leaders of the Government of National Unity and also Cabinet gave a clear indication that some of the proposals that were being put forward would not be favorably accepted, and Cabinet then felt that we should postpone the presentation of the budget. Now, we are in a Government of Unity system now, and in the end, no one party can be able to truly impose anything without much negotiation and discussion. And being in a Government of National Unity, by definition, means that you've got to work with others. You've got to take others along. You've got to build consensus. And we've got to ensure that we do indeed forge a unity. And in the end, that came to fruition. And that, in many ways, should not be seen as a crisis. Other people have described this or characterized this as a crisis. Budgets in many countries are possibly the most important event that happens. Even in your more mature democracies, they often have budget hiccups. They often have budget mini crises. which they are then compelled to sit back and resolve and find and build consensus. And that, what happened yesterday, is in many ways the maturation of our own democracy. And some people have said that this is democracy at work, and I would tend to agree. And there are many lessons that all of us would have learned about the process that ensued yesterday. So one can distinguish that between the form in which everything happened and also the substance of what was going to be presented to the nation. With regard to the form, many lessons that we would have learned, and if anyone were to get terrified, I would say there's no fatality. This is not a fatal fallout. The Government of National Unity is sustaining this. It will continue working, and we are going to go back to the drawing board and find one another. We've been through a number of other near crises that threatened the existence of the Government of National Unity. This is not one of those that will threaten the existence of the Government of National Unity. It is a hiccup that we are going to get over. And we've already set a date for the presentation of the budget on the 12th of March. Now, if you may want to scan the world, you'll find that in other countries, differences over budgets lead to the fall of governments. I can think of one, a recent one, Germany. They had a coalition government, as they call it, and they differed over the budget, and the government collapsed, and they're now having to go and hold elections. The same thing has happened in many other countries. In our own country, in municipalities, in metros, there are often real serious challenges over budgets. So budgets are moments when the actors become wide awake, and they want to be consulted and find consensus so that they can move their entities forward. And we are going to do precisely that. But what this moment also presents to us as South Africans is to raise the level of consciousness amongst all of us as South Africans about the substance of what the minister was going to present. The substance has to do with how we fund our priorities, where we find the money to fund our ambitions. And no Minister of Finance ever gets to a point where they will just willy-nilly raise taxes without getting to a point where they may believe that they have no other alternatives. And I have never met a person who wants to pay more taxes in our country, and I guess in the world. So nobody wants to pay more taxes. But this moment also presents us with an issue frontally that we need to confront, the trade-offs that we have to embrace. Right now, we've got limited revenue limits. Our revenue, as it stands, is not able to fund every priority, every ambition that we have. So the Minister of Finance scrounges around to find money. So in the end, as South Africans, we therefore need to sit back and say, how are we going to stop? And I think the Minister of Finance sought to address this yesterday. How are we going to get over the budget cuts? How are we going to continue funding all our priorities? The public servant salaries, the teachers, the nurses, the doctors, and the SRD, the grants that we've been paying to unemployed people. So the debate and the discussion needs to ensue around issues like that. And I do believe that that leads us to a moment of becoming more economically conscious, economically more aware and knowledgeable as the people of South Africa, and be able to determine exactly how we want to give the people of this country a better life, and how we are going to proceed to deal with the challenges of low growth, of unemployment, of supporting the livelihoods of our people, and making sure that we do indeed become the country that we want to be. So those are the two issues. The one was the form in which it all happened, where lessons are drawn. The other one is the substance of our finances that we need to engage with as South Africans, as political parties, but I'd like to say even as South Africans. In other countries, particularly in your northern democracy countries, much of their politicking revolves around the economy, much of their politicking revolves around the budget and how money, public money, is going to be dispensed, utilized. And in our case, I believe that we need to mature to that level as well, where we will focus on the issues that really matter in uplifting the livelihoods of South Africans. And I see a silver lining in what happened yesterday, because it then delivers us to a moment when every South African, whether living in the township, the rural area, wherever, becomes more conscious and aware of how our livelihoods can be improved and how money can be utilized to achieve that objective. Other than that, we continue to foster the peace in the Eastern DRC, and the East African and SADC summit, the joint summit, resolved that the chiefs of the Defense Force should meet, and that meeting is soon going to get underway so that we can consolidate the ceasefire and ensure that there is peace finally in the Eastern DRC. There continue to be a number of challenges which are being addressed on an ongoing basis. And I rest my case when it comes to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
May I go home now?
Thank you very much, Mr. President. What we often do as a practice when we have Q&A sessions, we honor the seniors, or rather the seasoned individuals in the newsroom. So we'll start with Mike, and then we'll come to Sophie. Mike?
Thank you very much. I don't like that seasoned part, I must say. Mr. President, one of the issues in the G20 now and in the past has been divisions over support for Palestine and support for Israel.
Yeah.
To what extent is this a threat to the unity of the G20?
Do I take one question after? Yes. Yes, there are different approaches to those two issues specifically, and various countries have different views, different thoughts, and in the end, Mike, it's going to come down to what we say in the declaration. The discussions will ensue, and countries will express themselves, but in the end, some measure of consensus will have to be built, and it will revolve around the language that will be crafted to express what I would say is a consensus view, and it will in the end be a view that takes into account the different approaches. We have found that discussions over the declarations go on until the very night before the Leaders' Summit, when all countries then sign off. Last year in Brazil, we were able to finally get to a point where countries that did not fully agree with what was a general consensus did stand out and say that they do not agree with this position, and they stated their view, and that was accepted. But their disagreement in the end did not lead to the adoption of the declaration. And I did think that that was a very good precedent and a very good precursor of what South Africa's G20 presidency would be. So I do expect that views in the end around those two issues will coalesce, and as they coalesce, good, proper language will be crafted, and once crafted, those who may feel strongly still that they do not buy into what is emerging as a consensus will state their positions, but that would then enable us to move forward with whatever declaration that will have been crafted. Thank you.
Sophie?
Thank you so much, Sophie Mkwena from the South African Broadcasting Corporation. Mr. President, the United States of America is the second largest trading partner of South Africa. And the current tension that's playing itself out there in the public domain, and with the U.S. Secretary of State not attending this summit. Yes, the U.S. is represented by the official from the embassy. How far are you in trying to reach out to President Trump directly, not with envoys, to try and iron out this? We saw him engaging President Vladimir Putin of the Russian Federation on a burning issue of Ukraine. When are you going to do that, or how do you hope to manage this? And finally, you spoke about peace and security when you were addressing ministers. You just touched on the DRC. Have you been able to reach out to President Kagame after that Smolanyana thing? Thank you.
Well, the United States is our second largest trading partner. It's a very important partner in a whole number of areas in which we interface in the world, be it political, trade, diplomatic, you name it. We interface and relate to the United States in many, many ways. And because we live in an interconnected world, no country can ever say that we are not going to be doing things either together directly or indirectly. So in our case, we are committed to having a good relationship with the United States, and we do relate to them in a number of ways. And what has ensued now with the Secretary of State not attending is in the end not a train smash, because the United States is still represented here, and they are part of the G20, and the discussions that will take place here are discussions that they are going to be part and parcel of. So this is not a boycott. This can be ascribed to a whole number of reasons, which he has stated, which we note. And we have resolved that we will, in the diplomatic process, be able to have those matters discussed, to have those matters dealt with, so that we are able to iron out wrinkles that may have appeared in our relationship. So they being an important player in our economy, and we also being an important player in the economy, because many companies from South Africa do invest there. And we may be a small little pimple, but we do sell stuff to them which they find very important. So we are in many ways joined, and perhaps joined at the hip. So we will continue to find ways, avenues and means through which we can continue relating to each other despite whatever may appear as differences. And may I add that as we relate to many countries in the world, we often find that we may not agree on everything, but we always find a way of relating to each other. And similarly now with the United States, we may not agree on a number of issues, but we want, in the spirit of diplomacy, in the spirit of promoting good relations, we want to be able to have an exchange with them. You want to know directly whether we are reaching out. I spoke to President Trump soon after he was elected and congratulated him and informed him or reminded him that we are going to be having the G20 here, and they are going to have theirs the following year, so we will hand over to them. And we spoke a bit about that. We also spoke about a number of South Africans who he holds in high regard, particularly in the golfing field, and he being a better golfer than I am, he said, well, then maybe when I come, we should play golf together. And I said, okay, I'll start practicing to get to that level. So our communications are good, and we will be building up all this as we continue addressing the issues that may appear to be difficult or challenges between us, as we do with all other countries in the world. We always find a way of finding solutions. I'm a solutions-oriented person, and I think President Trump is as well, and we will find solutions in this regard. As it comes to the DRC, we were very pleased that, as I said, the EAC, the East African Community, and SADC held their joint summit and came up with really good decisions, and that was followed up by the African Union, which endorsed the decisions that had been taken, and engagement continues. And as I said, we are looking forward to the chiefs of the Defense Force talking, or meeting rather, and beginning to lay the basis for the ceasefire to be installed in that part of the world. And as leaders, we will always find opportunities to talk, to meet, and I'm one of those who will never want to engage in an argument with the leader of another country in the public arena. Things are best handled when you deal with matters diplomatically and in a way where you find solutions. And that is my general approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. And in the interest of generational mix, Chando, I'll just give the mic to Chando here. Can you have the mic over here? Okay, great, thank you. Chando.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. My name is Tando Mayako from the Business Day. So in your opening remarks in the plenary, you noted that in the G20 there is a lack of consensus regarding issues of global significance. My question to you is, how does South Africa plan to navigate the current geopolitical tensions while promoting African interests during its G20 presidency? And then do you think that the US Secretary of State and the US Treasury Secretary not coming for the G20 meetings is an indication or signaling that President Trump himself might not come for the Leaders Summit? Thank you.
The G20 presidency of South Africa gives us an opportunity, as I said in the plenary, to put the interests of our continent on the global map. We've often been a continent that has been relegated to the back, and I was quite frontal in saying that this is the time. The G20 gives us, as Africans, the moment to put our issues on the global agenda. And I do believe that we've got a cohort of countries in the G20 and those that will be invited who will be willing to listen to Africa's story, to Africa's narrative, which will not only be expressed by South Africa, but by the African Union itself as a member, as well as by those countries on our continent that we are going to invite. And believe you me, we are going to invite quite a few of them to come to be part of particularly the Leaders Summit. So how will we navigate the differences that obviously currently exist? We will, by force of our own argument, be able to put those issues on the global map and be convincing, and try be as convincing as possible, because I do believe that we have a powerful story to tell on a number of issues, be it disaster. We are the countries in Africa, the majority of us, particularly in the south and also in the north, who are suffering from what we did not cause, climate change. And our story needs to be heard. That in dealing with climate change, we do need to get those countries that were more directly responsible for generating the climate change that many of us are suffering from now, to do something positive, to enable us to deal with the damage of the climate change that we're suffering from when it comes to financing, debt servicing costs. Secretary General of the United Nations say, lower income countries or developing economy countries are paying up to 8 times, sometimes even much more for their debt. We do need that story to be put on the global agenda so that something must be done. And similarly, when it comes to having to deal with financing recovery following disasters. And we want the issue of equality to be addressed, because we live in a very unequal world, not only within countries, but also at a global level. So we believe that we have a powerful story, a very powerful story to put to the world, and we hope that there will be coalescence, consensus rather, that will be built, and we will then be able to find common solutions. And we are hoping and do believe as South Africa that we've got a really good, potent story to put forward to the world. Your second question was about... Oh, yes. Yes, we've been told that, and he isn't here, the Secretary of State is not here, and we've also heard that the Secretary of the Treasury is very busy in Washington and all that, and we accept that. That is their choice. I mean, they have the freedom to choose. I sometimes don't attend certain summits. Get very busy, and I'm not able to, but we often make sure that South Africa is represented. So it's not often that my pretty face is that necessary, as long as South Africa is represented. So in the end, those who are able to come, we would welcome with warm arms. And as I said earlier, that we welcome them to the most beautiful country ever created, and that's South Africa. So when they don't come, they are missing out big time. But we are hopeful that we will have as many leaders as possible who will be able to come. The absence of, some leaders is not the end of the world. As long as the G20 family is able to meet, discuss important issues, and come out with a declaration. And that is what we aim for. The G20 is an important formation, and it has brought together the 20 key important economies in the world that have an impact on a huge part of the population of the world. So we believe that it is very important and store a lot of hope in the ability of the G20 to discuss issues. And so it acts as a family. And I think it is wrong to say if this one is not present, then its importance is diluted. It's never been. And some leaders in the past have not been able to attend the G20, but it moves on. It powers ahead and takes decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. The last two, Nelly Payton, and then Vuyo Mvogo will wrap us up. Can we just get the mic to Nelly over there? Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, Mr. President. Nelly Payton from Reuters. Following up on what happened yesterday, do you think that the budget will be significantly reworked? And what is your position on the 2 percentage point VAT increase? Do you support that?
I'm not going to reveal to you what we discuss in cabinet. So I took an oath that talks to that. The budget clearly is going to be reviewed. That is going to be the process that we follow. And in doing so, the Minister of Finance wants to move very quickly to start crafting what could be an alternative. But also, he will bring to the fore the stark realities that we face and the budgetary challenges that he has had to countenance in crafting the budget that he put forward. Everyone, I think, has said he has a very tight rope to walk. And in presenting that budget, he was trying to find some leeway to be able to support our ambitions, but at the same time to ensure that it becomes a budget that will support growth, but also support the livelihoods of South Africans. So yes, it will be re-looked at and it will be presented. And the joy and the good thing about it all is that South Africans will be able to see, as they now have seen what he was going to present, they'll now be able to see the slight differences, and I'm sure there will be, as the minister tries to straddle having an increase in VAT and not having an increase, and how his finances are going to stack up.
Thank you. Mr. President, the stark realities, as you call them, were known ahead of yesterday's unprecedented dramatic events in Parliament. But it did seem yesterday that deeper conversations were not held, certainly not among the members of the Government of National Unity, especially when it comes to controversial aspects such as VAT, which clearly from what some of your partners said were hidden. Now, you all knew that you were going on, or you were on uncharted waters. Hence, before you delivered your State of the Nation address, you had to call a special cabinet briefing where you had to appraise your partners on what you were going to say. Now, people are reading all sorts of things into this, including that perhaps there was no leadership where it matters ahead of the tabling of the budget. That, or at the very least, some people were tardy. Others are reading into this a retaliation on the part of your partner, the DA on the back of your Expropriation Act, your Bella Act, and the NHI?
I did say in the beginning that there are two issues that were at play. It was the form in which everything happened, and there's the substance. And I do believe that what the form that evolved yesterday has done is to teach us a number of lessons. The Minister of Finance, and this happens in many countries, on dealing with tax matters, finds it very difficult to be talking too loosely about it because it leaks out into the markets, it has a negative impact. And that is what has always been the tradition. So yesterday taught us another important lesson, and which we are going to draw a lot of information from. And that is going to be a process that will lead us to say exactly how we navigate all these processes, particularly where we are in the Government of National Unity, and also dealing with the challenges, as you correctly say, that we are dealing with. But what is more important that we need to focus on is the substance. The substance is what, for me, is more important. What happened yesterday will pass. It happened, and it will come to pass. We now need to buckle down and say, how do we then deal with the challenges that the country faces? I know there's a temptation for people to, be heated up, be hot under the collar and focus on the issue of yesterday. And said there was no leadership, there was no consultation. Yes, yesterday happened, it has given us a lot of lessons, but we must move on. And in moving, we cannot dwell on what has happened. We must now ask ourselves, how do we, one, draw lessons from what happened, and two, how do we then deal with the substantive issues? And this is where I want us as South Africans to focus our attention on. In dealing with yesterday, the government has not collapsed. The Government of National Unity has not collapsed. We're drawing a lot of lessons from what happened. Was it a process of hitting back? I do not see it as a revenge act by anyone. And if anything, it's been how a collective, if you like, a unity government should function. And we must also see what happens in other countries. In other countries, there are bun fights, major bun fights over budgetary issues. And yesterday, we had the mishap that happened. It's happened. We're drawing lessons from that. We move on. And the direction I want us to move on in is to say, how do we then deal with the substantive issues of funding our ambitions? And we've got great ambitions, and having to countenance the fact that we've got limited resources. How do we fund those? And quite often, when you have to fund your ambitions, it's either you tax or you borrow. And that's how governments draw resources from their own taxation processes, or they go and borrow. And in doing so, you then have to deal with all the other ramifications that have to do with the two. So the issue that came up was the concern about the ramifications of, or the consequences of having an increase in VAT. We therefore need to pause and say, how do we then move forward in dealing with the substantive issues? So this is what I want South Africans to now do. Our level of consciousness and awareness about our national budget now needs to be heightened. What this will also help with is that we will now also begin to focus not only on the national budget, but also on the provincial budgets. And also focus on how money is used, what is deployed for, and even go further and look at our local government budgets. So I do believe that this is an important moment, and I see a bit of a silver lining with all this, that our economic maturity and consciousness will be heightened as South Africans. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Colleagues, that concludes our session. Mr. President, you may take leave of us. Thank you.
Oh, you want me to go home?
And
okay.
thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.